Welcome to Reaching New Heights with Troy Bell, the city manager, City of Muskegon Heights, where you get to know what you need to know so you'll be in the know. Thanks again for tuning in, for those people who are listening and those people who are watching. It's great to be here again in the role of the city manager. Thanks to the vision of the city council and the mayor to have me in this role, working on behalf of you, the citizens of the city of Muskegon Heights and the greater Muskegon area. Um, I continue to be elated about the progress that we have and the potential that we have ahead of us, and the fact that we're moving forward. So many opportunities and so many things that are happening. I know many of the things that are happening, much of the stuff that's going on. It's difficult to see that from the view of as a resident, but from the position in City Hall, I can see these things coming together and all the pieces of the puzzle that are beginning to connect to each other. And in a moment, pretty soon, all these things are going to crystallize and materialize. But before we get into that, I want to say today you have me as your host. I don't have any guests coming in today. I don't think. We may get somebody who post in to make an announcement, but we'll wait to see if they connect with us later on during this show. So, with that being said, I do want to make sure that if there are any questions, that you take advantage of the opportunity to put questions in the chat section, things that I might be able to answer, questions that you might have about the city or things that are going on in the city. In case I don't cover them, there's a lot of stuff that I want to touch on here today, but I don't know that I will get to everything. So if I don't touch on something specific that you have a question, I want to make sure that I have a chance and opportunity to respond to that question. So make sure that you put something in the chat, and I will try to keep a keen eye on the chat in order to be able to answer those questions. Just a reminder, we're moving in a positive direction. You've heard me say that many times before, and I want to make sure that we continue that way. So let's couch the terms of our questions, comments in the chat section moving forward. Before I begin talking about the updates and information about the city, I do want to take a moment and say to our legislators, to our governor, to our House, to our Senate, and our new legislators and our old legislators, we need to get rid of the school debt. And so whatever we need to do in order to forgive that $43.7 million or $38.6 million that currently exists, we need to do it. The taxes associated with that are smothering our community. And if the state was capable of finding a way to do that under previous budgets when money was limited and possibly in a deficit, we can figure out how to do it when we have a surplus. And so I am imploring on behalf of the school district and the experience that I have as school superintendent, but also on behalf of the city and the city government, that we have to get rid of the debt. We have to figure out a way to forgive that debt. And if anybody comes and talks to you about the challenges associated with it, yes, we do have challenges. But all those challenges are going to continue, persist, and possibly even get worse if we do not forgive the school debt. So that's something that, please mention that to everybody that you can, every politician that you speak to. The one thing that is consistent always and forever is that we need to figure out a way to forgive that debt. And once that debt is forgiven, then you will see the millage rates on our city come down. And when the millage rates on our city come down, the same individuals, families, children, households that we serve, that the school district serves, are the same ones that are paying that millage either to the school or to the city. And those same businesses retail, consumers, industry that are paying a millage rate, that has to come down so that we can reduce the millage rate. And that money that previously went into supporting the schools can now go into other things that represent economic development. So remember, always make sure you make the comment, forgive the school debt. So with that said, I would want to go into giving you the updates and the announcements. We just had a city council meeting, and so I do want to cover just quickly the elements of our city council meeting. Um, so on November 14th, I'm getting a notice here to restart. I'm going to ignore that for now and let the producer touch on that. So, um, on November 14th at 5:30, the meeting was called to order for the city council. We had a regular agenda, but before the agenda started, we had presentations from the county assessor's office. We also had presentations from Metro Consulting, Kalea Thomas with regard to a resolution. And we had a presentation from Joe Buthker from the City of Muskegon regarding our water assessing. And after those presentations, we went into our standing items. We had a conversation about COVID and the update on COVID. Now, some of us, myself included, forget what it was like in 2019, 2020, 2021 when we were one of the hardest hit communities in Muskegon County with regard to incident rates of COVID, coronavirus, and death rates. And so I have to stop and think sometimes that was then and this is now. Yes, we're still struggling with and we're still fighting the coronavirus and the implications of the COVID. Some of our community members have long COVID, so they're still dealing with the consequences associated with it. And that's something that we cannot forget, we cannot ignore, and it's important for us to remember. And it's important for us to take note of what it took for us as a community to come together and navigate through the disparaging aspects of the coronavirus to get to the point where we are now. It's easy for us to forget and not look backwards on those things, and I'm not saying that we need to look backwards except to learn from our past, and so in order to inform for our future. That's one of the items that we need to make sure that we're informed. The things that we do in terms of personal hygiene and the interaction that we have with others has to be informed based on what we learned from COVID. And that was part of the discussion on the agenda at the meeting. We also talked about how to generate income. And so I took advantage of the opportunity there to talk about some of the aspects of what we have been done differently in order to generate income at the City of Muskegon Heights, and that included business licenses. There are entities out there that have been doing business in Muskegon Heights and have not paid for or acquired a business license in 30 years. For the life of me, I don't understand how that could happen, but it has happened. There are people that have slipped through the cracks, or businesses that have slipped through the cracks. And for those businesses that are doing the right thing, I'm sure that looking at those other businesses that are not doing the right thing can be torturous. And so we need to make sure that we're enforcing the business license requirements evenly, consistently across the community. And as we're beginning to do that, we have identified, discovered 30, 40, almost 50 different businesses that have not been billed for, and if they've been billed for, have not paid, and if they have not paid, need to pay for their business licenses. That represents not only revenue for the city, but it also represents something that's equally as important, a inspection, building inspection, as well as a fire inspection. And sometimes we wonder why we have so many incidents associated with structures in the city that are engulfed, that have fire issues, and if we continue to be diligent about doing fire inspections, some of these can be avoided. I'm not going to say all of them, but at least some of these, at least we're doing our due diligence to make sure that we're addressing as many of the items as we can as part of the fire inspection. And so, um, new revenue, business licenses. Also, new revenue, fire inspections. I just talked about fire inspections. We were not conducting a number of fire inspections for the existing businesses. I'm not talking about just the new businesses, but existing businesses. Now that that is something that we are doing, there is revenue attached to that as well. And so that is new revenue. When you look at the collections rate on our water services, we are diligently going through our water billing to look at who is delinquent and who is not. And I'm sorry for those folks out there that have not paid for their water billing, but the time when we would allow for accounts to get into high numbers is gone. And so we're going to reduce that by shutting people off. And by shutting people off, we limit our liability and create an opportunity for us to collect on those accounts. That is new revenue, and fortunately, we're bringing that into the community. I'm not touching on all the economic development that is coming, the work that's going to be done down at Mona Lake, the new houses that we're building. All those will represent increased taxes, increased property revenue, et cetera. Not even talking about that, but here today, we are addressing bringing new revenue into the city based on the things that we're doing internally with regard to water billing. Another area is our vacant building fees. Not a popular area at all. And I'll be the first to say that, if I get a complaint, that oftentimes that complaint is about vacant building fees. I'm saying, though, don't complain to me. This ordinance has been on the books, and we're doing it according to the ordinance since 2009. And so it has not been, as far as I can tell, enforced consistently when it was put on the books in 2009. I think it was even amended in 2009, so it might even predate 2009. But here and now, today, we are moving forward with a consistent enforcement of the vacant building fees. And what that means is if you have a property that you own in the City of Muskegon Heights, you have to do something with it. If you choose not to do anything with it and it remains vacant, not occupied, not being used for business purposes, you don't have any evidence that it is occupied or evidence that you're using it for business purposes, you're going to have to register your property as vacant. And when you register, there's a fee associated with it. And that fee escalates every year that the property remains unoccupied or vacant. And that's part of the ordinance. And it is intended to encourage people who have property to either fix the property up and get it back on the tax rolls as an active property that's being used, or register it as a vacant property. If you register it, it's going to cost you. It starts off at $500. The next year, it's $1,000. I think it goes from $1,000 to $2,000, multiple years at $2,000, and then it hops up to $3,500. So it's not cheap for a property just to sit there. I know the holding cost on these properties is low. The cost to hold them is slim because the property values haven't been properly assessed in the City of Muskegon Heights. So if you want to hold on to a property, it doesn't cost you a lot. But today, going forward, in the last 3 years since I've been here, it has, as part of our administration, been an objective to begin to enforce the vacant building fees so that it will cost you to have to hold on to a property. And if that's what you want to do, that's fine. That represents revenue to the city. I'd rather have the revenue of property insurance, property taxes, or income taxes. But if the city can't get that revenue, then we would get the revenue from you registering those properties as vacant. So more revenue for the city means the ability to offer more services or better services. For instance, we don't have a Parks and Rec program any longer. That is something that I would love to bring back to the city of Muskegon Heights, because what we do for our children and for our youth is the definition. It defines who we are as a community and as a city. And if we invest today in the pipeline of our youth, then the product and results of that are evident in the future. So we have to figure out a way that we can expand our services to reinstate our programs for Parks and Rec. But that's another story altogether. So these are some of the efforts that we have with our community. Thanks, Mr. Jones, for tuning in. I appreciate you watching and commenting as well. These are some of the things that we're doing. I only touched on a few of the revenue generators. There are others, but internally we are taking the small steps to try to accomplish those things in terms of bringing in revenue. The next thing that was on the agenda after how to generate income was RRC training. And we had a guest speaker that came in, Mr. Franzak, that spoke to us about RRC. That stands for Redevelopment Ready Cities, or Redevelopment Ready Certification. What that is it is a certification that we have to get from the state, MEDC, Michigan Economic Development Corps. That would make us eligible to get additional grant funding, additional funding for economic development in our community. That's why it's important. But the steps that you have to go through for RRC to get that certification are steps that would make our community more attractive to those people that want to come into the community, or people who live in the community that want to do redevelopment in the community. These pieces that we have to put in place in order to get that certification are pieces that we have to show proof of it, are pieces that make us more attractive to anybody who wants to do economic development. And again, economic development is that foundation that allows us to create services, bigger and better services, to be able to improve, I call it quality of life, but to break it down, how it feels to live in our community. Is it fun? Is it enjoyable? We talk about live, work, play, pray, and learn. These are all aspects of what make it enjoyable to be a resident of Muskegon Heights, or a business owner in Muskegon Heights. And so those are the things that we can accomplish through redevelopment in our community. And as we show proof, and we've gone through the process to get the certification, now we're eligible to get the loans, the low interest rate loans, or grants associated with those cities throughout the state of Michigan that are RRC certified. We've gone through that process. We've submitted documentation. We've done the iterative back and forth with the RRC committee folks, and we have submitted the last draft at their request. So we should be ready now to receive the RRC certification within weeks. And what that means is then we can go out and request or apply for additional funding to do economic development in our community, which is what this is all about. So thank you, Mr. Franzak, our Building and Zoning Director, for coming in to talk about the value of us becoming RRC certified and what that means to our community. Next, we had old business. We have some council protocols, and what council protocols are basically the rules and regulations that the council agrees as a council that they're going to follow in the way that you conduct a meeting. Robert's Rules of Order has to be the framework through which you conduct a meeting at the city, but that doesn't drill down into the details. Robert's Rules of Order does not tell you that a person can speak 5 minutes or 1 minute. And so those types of salient details are things that are adopted and addressed potentially as part of the council protocols. That was tabled back on May 9th, 2022. And for the first time since then, it was voted to take it off the table for discussion on December 12th. So if that is an issue that is important to you, I encourage you as a resident, citizen, stakeholder, interested party to show up on December 12th so that that can be discussed. The council protocols can be discussed and voted on and adopted, hopefully, so that going forward it's clear to everybody in council what the expectations are and how the meetings are supposed to run. I'll just tell you one of the items that's on there, and you can reach out to Ms. Franklin in my office, and she can give you a list of the proposed council protocols. They were drafted by the city attorney. One of the items was that our meetings should be completed, I think, they start at 5:30. The meetings should be completed by 7. If they're not completed by 7, then a specific motion has to be made in order to extend the meeting or to apply whatever is the balance of the agenda to a future meeting date. So that has not been approved. That's one of the suggestions, but just to give you an idea, when we talk about council protocols, that's what we're talking about. And then after that, we went into new business. I'm happy to say that all the items under new business were approved. That includes $30,000 under Public Works general ledger number, not to exceed $30,000 for snow removal equipment for DPW. That was a recommendation of the Finance Committee. Another recommendation of the Finance Committee was the repair of a jackhammer and the removal of, repair of the jackhammer and the grader for DPW. That was not to exceed $10,000 for the same GL number in the Public Works budget. And so those are repairs that we purchases that we know we need to have to make, repairs that we have to make that are part of the budget already. And so we need approval to move forward with those types of equipment purchases or for those types of repairs. Number 3 was a recommendation by the Personnel Committee for us to, for the city to enter into a contract with Muskegon County Assessing. And if you remember, Mr. Jackson, longtime director of Assessing and Equalization, retired and gave us a retirement date, and then unfortunately, due to health, had to accelerate that retirement date. And as a result, we are currently recruiting for that position. But in the interim, while we're recruiting for that position, we need to have somebody fill that role. And so this contract allows us to connect with the county so that the county can provide that service in the absence of an assessing and equalization officer. So I'm excited to be able to move forward with somebody in that role, with the county fulfilling that function. And so that's a value to the cities to keep business going while we're in the process of recruiting. What was important about that is that that contract is temporary. It is not a permanent contract. It does envision going through, as part of that contract, going through all of our assessing, all of our taxes, and looking at each parcel individually and correcting anything that might be in our database that's not accurate, whether it's the chain of custody for parcels or the description of a parcel in our database. But as they come on board, those are things that they will address as part of the day-to-day activities. In addition to that, we are going to undertake an effort on a parcel-by-parcel basis to have a company come in and begin to do assessments and clean up the rolls. Does that represent increased taxes for anybody at the city? No, it does not represent increased taxes. However, what you will see is that one, there are properties out there that are not on the tax roll, and we're not receiving any income for it. And so for some reason, they fell through the cracks. Those parcels exist, but they're not representing any tax revenue to the city. We need to get those parcels on. So for those people that, the exception, I said that your taxes weren't going to go up. Those people who are paying zero taxes because their property was not on the tax roll, well, now that your property is going to be on the tax roll, you're going to have to pay for it. But for those people who are already paying, this doesn't represent an increase because it will change the assessed value of your property, not the taxable value, but the assessed value. So you may find out that the assessed value yesterday of your property was, say, $30,000, and now, based on going out to the market and looking at properties throughout the area, the assessed value of your property that you already own might be worth $100,000 instead of $50,000. And even though you might be paying taxes at a certain level, that level is going to continue at that level, but the actual value of your property, you may find out as a result of this parcel by parcel process, the actual value of your property has increased. And that's going to be important come anytime that you decide to sell your property or renovate your property or the property changes hands, then that will come into play. So item number 4, the firefighter contract. We've had this on the agenda from previous meetings, and I'm happy to say that we were able to ratify the contract. So that you're aware, as a community, the firefighters have been operating diligently without a contract for the last 2 years. We entered into contract negotiations for our contract, and unfortunately we had to stop contract negotiations. And in the interim, our firefighters still showed up to work. They still did their job, and they continue to work without a official contract in place. Now we have an official contract that is in place, or at least it was ratified by the union, and it was agreed upon by the city council. And so the next step is the signatures just have to go on the document, and it's done. So I'm happy to bring that that challenge to an end and bring it to a conclusion. So going forward, they will have a contract, and we will be able to operate under that contract. So that's a good thing. Item number 5 was the recommendation by the city manager to approve the short-term agreement with the City of Muskegon for safe drinking water. That is important to us because we have been notified that our filtration plant director, whose license we've been operating on, is going to be retiring at the end of this year. So in the interim, while we are recruiting for this position, it's important for us to be able to have the proper licenses in place while we're going through the recruitment process, so we don't skip a beat, so that we continue to produce water for our community, albeit at a reduced rate because of the fact that we have less customers, but that we're going to continue at that rate without any hitches. And so the approval of this contract will allow us as a city to work with the City of Muskegon and their license holder to share in the responsibility for supervising and overseeing our water filtration plant until such time that we are able to replace that position. Now, mind you, if we're fortunate enough, we may be able to recruit and retain somebody before our filtration director retires, in which case we won't have to take advantage of that contract. But if we are not able to recruit and place somebody in that position prior to then we have this contract in place to be able to cover us. The next item was the resolution for the Spark Eagle grant. So you may hear a lot out there in the streets about the Spark grant. The Spark grant, that is a Eagle grant, Environmental Great Lakes and Energy Foundation. It used to be Department of Natural Resources. They received money as part of the American Rescue Plan, and they have put together a package under what they've called the Spark grant process. It's a 3-round process. You get 3 bites at the apple, maximum of $1 million. So if in the first round you get $200,000, and the second and third round you're eligible for $800,000, but the maximum that you can get is $1 million. So if you get $200,000 in the first round, let's say in the second round you apply and you get $200,000 more, that's a total of $400,000. And then in the final round, you would only be eligible for the balance, which is $600,000, total of $1 million. So this resolution was coming before council for council to approve it, to allow us to put in our application for the Spark grant. And so It doesn't cost us anything to do that. There's no match requirement. So it's a no-brainer pretty much for us to say, yes, we want to go after the Spark grant. And we have um, partners that we're working with that are assisting us in the grant process of going after the Spark grant. In fact, we had a conversation today with an engineering architectural firm about things that we can do in order to put drawings together that would help support our case for Spark grant. And so that was approved, and so the resolution will be signed with Metro Consulting, Kalea Thomas, so that they will have the permission to move forward with putting in a grant on our behalf. We did identify 3 areas. There's a maximum of 3 areas that we wanted to focus on. Those 3 areas that we've identified are the cemetery, Rowan Park, and Mona Lake. So when I say Rowan Park, I'm talking about the Rowan Park complex, including the green areas on both sides of Baker Street, the potential abandonment of Baker Street and using that as a walking promenade, the green area that is currently part of Rowan Park, as well as the Strand building. So all of that is part of the Rowan Strand complex, and so that's a focus area. The cemetery, there are several projects that we want to do in order to raise the bar of our cemetery. We've already begun to do that with the grooming and the cutting. But previously, the mowing contracts that we had in place were just to cut the cemetery. Now we're actually grooming the cemetery, which is an improvement. It's still not perfect, a long way to go. But in addition to that, we want to spend some time and focus on making that a welcoming green area. There's a number of projects, whether it be the restoration of the cannon, the facilities up there, putting in infrastructure to make that area safer and to make it to create accountability, whether it be cameras, security systems. All those things are part of some of the things that we want to do with the cemetery. Curb lines, trees, those types of things. So excited about that if we're successful in getting the Spark grant. And the final area is Mona Lake. There are a number of things that we want to be able to do with the Mona Lake property, realizing that one of the fastest growing tourist initiatives in the state of Michigan is the lakefront, and we have lakefront property in Mona Lake Park. We want to take advantage of it, and we want to make it accessible, and we want to make it welcoming to the community and even those outside of the community, so that anybody that comes to Mona Lake feels like this is a place that they can call home. And so that means extending the beachfront if we can. That means also including additional infrastructure like we did with the cemetery so that we can create accountability and the like, camera, security. But it also means reformatting the parking lot. It also means addressing the flooding issue. We can't use the park to its fullest extent if there's water everywhere. And so that's part of what we want to address using the Spark grants. And then, of course, if anything that we can wrap around or enhance the functionality of the pavilion, we want to take advantage of that. And so with those 3 things in mind, we're putting in $1 million ask for these Spark grants. And I'll just say, I had the pleasure of going before Eagle before. We have a grant request in already for infrastructure in Mona Lake Park to Eagle. I think they had 80 applications and invited 8 people in to provide presentations on their projects. The City of Muskegon Heights was one of those 8 entities that was invited to come in and give a presentation to Eagle, formerly DNR, and we were one of them. And so at the conclusion of our presentation, and we're still waiting on the funding for that, so keep your fingers crossed on that, they pulled me aside and said, hey, I want to make sure that you're aware that this Spark grant is coming. It hadn't been approved yet, but we want to make sure that you put in an application for it because it is one of those things that is designed for communities like ours that are trying to do the types of things that we are looking to do with economic development and green space development in the City of Muskegon Heights. So by December 19th, I think it is, maybe December 17th, that grant application has to be in, and the resolution was approved. And the last item was the discussion of the city manager's contract in closed session. So It wasn't precisely the contract. It was more the evaluation, which is part of the contract. There are specific dates in the contract that talk about the evaluation. And so that was something that was able to be discussed in closed session, and excited about that and bringing that to conclusion as my contract is up in January for a renewal. So hopefully that will bear positively on where my contract goes. So that was our council meeting. Hello, Ms. Hines. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Thanks for commenting with us. Appreciate that. A number of the things that was our council meeting, so I wanted to make sure everybody was up to date. Our council meetings are the second and fourth Monday of every month, and so that's at 5:30. We just finished our council meeting this past Monday, and so it'll be 2 weeks before our next council meeting. You will find on, which I believe is November 28th. I do want to, before I forget, next week is Thanksgiving. The city, the holidays are Friday and Thursday for Thanksgiving, and because the city is on a 4-day schedule, that means that the city will only be open on Monday and Tuesday. We will celebrate the holidays, the Thursday and Friday, on Wednesday and Thursday. And so please remember that the city will be closed on Wednesday and Thursday of next week, only open on Monday and Tuesday. So if there's things that you need to get done at City Hall that you need to come in for, you need to come in on Monday and Tuesday. Otherwise, you can always use the drop box at City Hall. So before I forget, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. And Ms. Mary brought to my attention, oh wow, I'm forgetting Ms. Mary's last name. She's going to kill me. But nonetheless, she brought to my attention that there may be some confusion about leaves and the leaf pickup. So the contract that we have with Republic that says that they will pick up leaves throughout the year ends the last full week of November. And so what does that mean in terms of a date? That means that, and I want to be absolutely sure that I give you the correct date, that means the last full week of November is going to be December 3rd. December 3rd is a Sunday, so that would be the last date for pickup if you have a pickup date on Sundays. I'm not sure if there's anybody in our community that has a Sunday pickup date, but that would be the last leaf pickup. And so if you have leaves that you're going to rake, make sure you rake them before December 3rd. That week, you need to be, whenever your pickup date is of that week, you need to have the leaves out there so they can be picked up that last week. There is some chance that if leaves fall late this year, that I will be able to possibly be able to negotiate getting Republic to come back later and pick up leaves. But that's a courtesy, that's not a definite, and so that's something I have been successful in negotiating in past years. I'm going to try to go ahead and do it again this year. No guarantees on that, so if you have the opportunity to rake leaves and put them in a bag and get them out there to the curb, please do that. We are still in negotiations and conversations about the possibility of using a leaf vac. And if that negotiation conversation with the residents comes to fruition, at some future time we'll be able to rake our leaves to the curb, put them on the street, and a truck company will come up our streets and suck the leaves up, clear the street line, the curb line, and vacuum up all those leaves. But that is not currently in place. It's something that's been part of the conversations. It would cost us $36 a year in order to do something like that and to get started, but that's something that is still part of the conversation. Please don't quote me and say that, well, the city manager said that we're doing this. We're not, as of yet. It's something that we are thinking about. That was a proposal that was made by council, and so, or members of council, and it's under discussion. So if you are interested in that, please make sure that you call in and let Ms. Franklin know that A, that you're interested in it, and B, that you support it, so that we can include that in the conversation. But otherwise, you have to have your leaves picked up by December 3rd and out there whenever your pickup date is. Don't want to forget that. Um, Several items went in front of the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee met this Saturday. A number of items that were already on the agenda were discussed then. And so if you have any questions about that, Councilman Collins is the chairperson of the Finance Committee. You can reach out to him or come to the meetings, and you'll see the items that come off of the Finance Committee onto the city agenda for approval. I want to make sure that everybody's aware that there are several vacancies that are available at City Hall. And so we have a list of all the vacancies. I know you can't see that on this sheet here. You can see a little bit. But it's a list that you can call down to City Hall. It's also on our website that gives a list of all the positions that we're recruiting for. Within the finance department, we are recruiting for the finance director and a community service representative, confidential, somebody who would be doing our payroll and doing our cash receipting. And unfortunately, if you did not know, the person that was doing our cash receipting before, unfortunately, has passed away. And we are scrambling to try to make sure that we cover that position because we're at the bare minimum. But most importantly, if you have any condolences that you want to share with the family, please reach out to City Hall for that. But in the interim, in addition to recruiting for the finance department and those two positions, the inspections department is still recruiting for code enforcement officers. There's 4 positions for that. The Department of Public Works is recruiting for light equipment operators. There's 4 positions for that. And realize that our budget goes to the fiscal year in December 31st of 2022, and then we start a new fiscal year in January 1. And so these positions would be available if they're not filled between now and then, going into the next fiscal year as part of the budget. At the filtration plant, I mentioned that we have retirements there, and so we're recruiting for the filtration plant operator and manager. That is an F as in Frank, 1 license, as well as 2 maintenance and operator positions. We have some candidates that have already submitted for that, but we're still accepting applications, so please submit for that. And within the fire department, the positions that we have open are the deputy fire chief, 5 firefighter positions, and an administrative assistant for the daytime. Within the police department, we have 6 positions for full-time officers as well as part-time officers. So if you are interested in the police department, and when I say interested, we're not just looking for, and the chief is not just looking for people who grew up wanting to be police officers, as a former police officer, but people who had an interest in investing in the community, whatever that might be. You might have grown up with the satisfaction or desire to be a teacher. We can teach you how to be a police officer. We can teach you how to police. But what we're looking for is people from the community who have a heart and passion for investing in the community. That could be a social worker, could be a physician assistant, could be a doctor or lawyer, people who want to give to the community. Law enforcement is an occupation for you. And let me tell you, I grew up wanting to be an engineer. And by happenstance, I ended up being a police officer while I was in school. And let me tell you, the satisfaction and joy that I got from being able to help people in some of the most dire situations as a police officer is something that I will never forget. Even though my passion was to become an engineer, but an engineer that invested in the community. And so I got to do that in this role, all of it. But my point is that we are recruiting for anybody who's interested in investing into the community. And that doesn't mean just people that grew up watching cops. So in addition, the last item within the assessing department, like I mentioned before, we are recruiting for an assessing and equalization officer. So number of positions that are available. Some moderate to bad news. The Treasury Department has informed us that it is important to them that we fill the assessing and equalization role, which we are actively doing with our contract with the county. But the Department of Treasury wanted to make sure that we were aware, that they were aware that that was a role that needed to be filled. And finally, what I want to share with you is we presented to council a few weeks in the past. I say we, but it was actually the consultant, Peter Dempsey from Public Service Consulting, who has been working with the Citizen Committee of folks, focus group, cross-section of the community around American Rescue Plan funding. He has been meeting with them. They've had round table discussions. They've had town hall meetings. They've had surveys that went out. All of that he's brought together, compiled it, and gave a presentation to council. And that presentation to council made a recommendation based on the committee and the survey results of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 focus areas. And with those 7 focus areas, with the money that we have remaining from American Rescue Plan, he shepherded the recommendation of the committee of folks, indicating what they would suggest are the amounts of money that should be allocated to those focus areas. And I'll just go through that briefly, but I do want to say thank you, Jeanette, for tuning in, and I'm glad that this has been good news for you. Ms. Aubrey says thanks for sharing. Let's see, she asked for the date for items to be picked up, which I think I covered. If I didn't, come back to me and let me know, and I can address whatever question you might have. So the focus areas, it recommends, well, let me first start by saying, as part of the deficit elimination plan, because the city was in a deficit, the American Rescue Plan was awarded to the city, and one of the specific reasons that the American Rescue Plan funding was awarded to the city was to cover deficits like that which we have. And so as part of the deficit elimination plan, the council agreed to allocate money towards the 2021 deficit, the 2022 deficit, and the 2023 deficit, or perceived projected deficits, in order to show that over a 5-year period we could work our way out of the deficit. And so as part of that deficit elimination plan, funds from American Rescue Plan Act were awarded, and that left us after the initial award of just under $11 million. It was $10,682,772,000. After a portion was given to each fiscal year, the remainder was $3.6 million, $3,365,000. So the recommendation was of this committee to give $910,000 and to the priority, not give, but allocate towards that priority of housing, $910,000. $390,000 to the priority of roads, infrastructure, facilities, and equipment, and this would include DPW equipment, city hall improvements. $290,000 would be allocated to safety and security, blight abatement, dump site cameras, etc. $375,000 would be allocated towards the downtown Main Street facade and the industrial park, and that would include streetscapes, enhancements, sidewalks, and alleyways. $400,000 allocated towards the creation of nonprofits, or to support nonprofits that are located in Muskegon Heights. Very few. I think we have Reed Muskegon. I think we have Pathfinders that are actually physically located in Muskegon Heights. So that $400,000 would go to support the efforts of, or the creation of, nonprofits that are based in Muskegon Heights. $600,000 would be allocated towards technology and organizational improvement. $400,000 would be allocated to parks and recreation infrastructure and programming, and that's things like I talked about: park improvements, security cameras, Rowan Park, A Street Park, Johnny O Park, the bathroom facilities, etc., for a total of $3,365,000. So that's what the recommendation was of the committee. It remains to the council to make a decision, final decision um, on allocating those funds in that way. I'm hopeful that they will follow the recommendations and instructions of the committee, the cross section of folks that came from the community. With that said, we have submitted to the county, because the county has American Rescue Plan funding available, a request by the City of Muskegon Heights for $6.5 million. And that request is in addition to two things: letter of support for getting rid of the school debt. We want to retain our school here. We want to get rid of the school debt. Also, we've requested that the county land bank either do one of three things: transfer the property that they own in the City of Muskegon Heights to the City of Muskegon Heights so that we can be the purveyors of our own destiny, self-selection, self-determination, or the second item is give the city the first right of refusal to purchase any property that may be up for purchase by a third-party entity. Or a third, if the first two are not acceptable, the third is to properly maintain, cut, mow those properties, board up those properties that the land bank owns within the city jurisdiction of the City of Muskegon Heights. In addition to those two items, the city has requested, or I should say the mayor has requested $6.5 million. And that memo is available at City Hall at the clerk's office. But just briefly, I will say $2 million of it is for Broadway and Peck Streetscape, $1 million to match the funding for housing development, because if we don't build houses, we can't generate property tax revenue. If we can't generate property tax revenue, we don't have services: police, fire, public works, programming for our parks. We need to begin to rebuild those properties. 1,000 vacant lots. This community was developed for 5,000 parcels to be occupied, and we only have 3,700 occupied. So we need to do that. $1.2 million for the Strand building, Strand facility development. The new development there, $850,000 for Mona Lake Park, $650,000 for Rowan Park, $450,000 for retail housing development, and $350,000 as part of going through and adjusting all of the assessments of property in Muskegon Heights, which would increase tax revenue, not tax revenue, but it would increase the assessed value both on the county level and on the city level. So that comes to a total of $6.5 million. So that request has gone to the county, and so hopefully you'll support that. So with that, that is pretty much everything. I covered a lot of stuff today. I know it was just me. I apologize that you didn't have the distraction or the entertainment value of other people coming in. That will be in the future. We hope to have Ken from the community college come in the future, a number of other guests that we have slated. And so it's just a matter of getting on their calendars and their schedules for that. But thank you so much for joining us for this information. Thank you for those people who posted. Miss Aubrey said she was asking about furniture and other items to be picked up with a city trash sticker. Oh, so anything that you continue to sticker and put on the terrace, we will continue to pick up. I'm sorry, not we. The Republic will continue to pick that up. The leaves in the first week of, the last week of November, December 3rd. After that, if there's stuff that's left on the terrace, then you're subject to the ordinances, and the ordinances say that you got to pay to have it picked up, or if you don't pay to have it picked up, then you're going to be cited for not having it picked up. So thanks, Miss Aubrey, for the good show shout out, and if you have any other questions, you have my phone, so contact me, Miss Aubrey. But other than that, thank you to everybody for tuning in to Reaching New Heights, because we are moving forward, we are changing, we are getting better, we are raising the bar, we are reaching new heights. with Troy Bell, the city manager, City of Muskegon Heights, where you get to know what you need to know so you'll be in the know. Continue to be blessed.